Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out on such a cold date to our event. My name is Abigail Kabandula, and I'm the director of the Africa Center at the Josef Korbel School of International Studies. Today we have a special event. We want to focus on the war in Sudan. And before we do that, with my esteemed colleagues on the panel, I would like to invite you to take a few minutes to watch a PBS documentary excuse me, that we have prepared. The reason we are showing the documentary is because there's just a lot of information that is in the video, and we would like you to be a little bit up to speed with what has happened so far, who are the main actors, who is involved in the mediation, where is the most fighting, who is fighting, getting acquainted with the main actors both in the conflict and also with the mediation. So the video is 20 minutes. The entire video, it's a PBS documentary, is 45 minutes. But since we don't have that much time, we only show 20 minutes of it. And then please feel free to finish off the video at your own leisure on YouTube. So I'd like to invite Mandy to play the video. So sit tight, and then I'll be back to introduce the panelists.
Bloody war between the country's army and a militia, the Rapid Support Forces, for 16 months, with tens of millions of Sudanese civilians caught in between. This week, the United States mediated peace talks in Geneva. The RSF militia sent a delegation, but at the last minute appeared to not officially participate in the talks. The Sudanese armed forces refused to attend altogether. In the first of her reports from a rare trip inside the country with the support of the Pulitzer Center, special correspondent Leila Molana Allen sat down with Sudan's vice president in Port Sudan on the Red Sea.
5 years ago, elated Sudanese, young and old, danced in the streets after countrywide protests brought down Sudan's 30-year dictator and indicted war criminal Omar al-Bashir. Democracy had arrived. But just 2 years later, the Sudanese army and a rehabilitated militia, the Rapid Support Forces, united under Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and took power in what Sudanese civil society calls a coup against the people. Malik Agar is Sudan's vice president and deputy head of the military junta that's ruled the country since 2021. A former insurgent leader, he's been a leading political and military figure for decades. Before the explosion of the conflict last April, RSF leader General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, widely known as Hemedti, was vice president. Agar succeeded him after the RSF broke away from Sudan's army and began to fight against it. The war erupted seemingly without warning, taking most Sudanese by surprise in its speed and ferocity. The NewsHour sat down with Vice President Agar to discuss the latest on the fighting and the prospects for peace.
The attacking force was a collateral force, very huge, and they put the Sudan government army into a position of defense. And after 1 year, the Sudanese army managed to change the mood of the war, and now the Sudanese army is on offense. So to fight them, to follow them from area to area is rather difficult for a conventional army. This is why it's taking long.
Agar has been an outspoken critic of international attempts to mediate the conflict and encourage negotiations with the RSF, saying the only solution is the complete military destruction of the militia.
Any leader in Sudan who can go into negotiations with the RSF is committing a political suicide. RSF is an instrument, is a tool for the UAA and others. Hemedti has no control of the forces here. How do you kill people? How do you rape girls and women and everybody and destroy the infrastructure and want to rule? Then you have no control of these forces.
Multiple foreign governments, including the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Iran, have taken an interest in the conflict, resulting in a steady flow of foreign weapons and mercenaries on both sides. In June, Agar traveled to Russia to meet with President Vladimir Putin. We asked what he hoped to achieve.
Because I'm fighting a war, and when I'm fighting a war, I don't need tanks, I need weapons. And who manufactures weapons? And if I have the ability of getting those weapons, if I have them, I'm getting this one, I will get it.
Attention to the conflict has been muted in the West, but news that Sudan's government had repaired diplomatic relations with Iran and signed a new weapons deal this spring raised alarm. Agal says if the United States is worried about where they get their weapons, it should sell to Sudan itself.
We are not saying here, I'm not confessing here we are buying weapons from Iran, but we are ready to buy weapons from any country.
Human rights groups have documented evidence of weapons being supplied to the RSF by the UAE, Russia and Turkey, among others, smuggled into RSF territory via neighbouring Chad. The United States is a leading arms seller to the UAE. What impact are those foreign weapons having on your ability to fight this war?
Definitely, they have an effect, a great effect, because these are new weapons. They are not used. Sudanese army, they never had such weapons. These militia are being supported by the UAE. I mean, let me put it bluntly, by the UAE and others. The UAE has a lot of economic interests in Sudan. Number one of them is gold mining in Sudan. They wanted some sort of agricultural lands in Sudan. They had also an interest of having an area on the Red Sea for their own interests. We believe there are other interests from other countries also. So it is a complex situation.
What do you want the United States to do in terms of taking responsibility for the use of those US-manufactured weapons being used to slaughter innocent civilians here in Sudan?
One thing that the US government can do is, one, to stop supplying the UAE. They know, the Americans, they know that weapons are being used in Sudan. There is no doubt about that, because the evidence are there. So then, for them also, they have to decide what to do. Do they want the war in Sudan to continue, or do they want, as they talk about democracy and human rights, do they want to preserve the human rights of the Sudanese? And you cannot bring democracy on the mother of the guns. And you cannot bring democracy when you are using militias.
So you believe that these efforts on behalf of the United States to try and become involved in peace talks for Sudan are simply political posturing ahead of the election?
Yes, definitely yes. They are just political about it, and they are not serious about it. When these elections are over, they will change their mind.
The US is mediating talks this week in Geneva aimed at improving the humanitarian situation. But both of the chief parties to the conflict are absent. Leaders say they have little faith in the process. What is it that makes you feel that this US administration isn't a serious partner for peace in Sudan?
Their behavior tells me that. The US administration, they have never came here. They have an envoy who has never put a leg in Sudan. And he's a special envoy for Sudan. And he's just talking with others that from Egypt and Uganda, Kenya, and all these things. And you just bypass Sudan in the middle here.
US engagement has been patchy. Special Envoy to Sudan, Tom Perriello, has never visited the country in his role. A planned visit alongside USAID Director Samantha Power was aborted after the US team refused to travel any further inside Sudan than the airport, citing security concerns. What does that say to you about their seriousness of being involved in peace talks with Sudan?
If you are serious to solve a problem somewhere, why you don't go and meet the president in this country? Why you don't meet us in our country? But this is not happening.
Meanwhile, civil political leaders say they've been cut out of the peace talks and plans for Sudan's future. Is it the intention of the Sudanese armed forces to immediately give back power to a democratically elected leader when the war is over?
Yet they are ready to take the country to elections and hand over power.
And that is what will happen?
That is what's supposed to happen. You win the war first, and then you go for establishment of democracy.
For now, as the war rages on, democracy has been put on the back burner. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Layla Milana Allen in Port Sudan.
In her second in a series of reports, Special Correspondent Layla Milana Allen traveled to cities on the front lines in central and southeastern Sudan, where she met the people caught in the middle of this violence.
Ravaged. After a year and a half of war, this is what remains of the Sudanese capital Khartoum's residential suburbs, once home to millions. The bullet-battered streets tell a story of hand-to-hand combat, craters from missiles fired at close range, ripping through walls and rooftops every few yards. A century-old mosque scarred by hails of gunfire. The area's largest bank, incinerated. Life-saving hospitals, gutted. So the RSF were using this as a base?
Yes, as a base. So
Right.
When the army staff liberate this place, so the militia bomb it and destroy it.
After months of fighting, the Sudanese army has managed to recapture this area, but danger isn't far. Just across the Nile in Khartoum City, the Rapid Support Forces continue to shell, shoot, and raid. Not a single street is unscathed by the violence. The ache of loss echoes through the eerie silence here.
Blocked off from the main cemetery by the constantly moving front lines, civilians have been burying their family members killed in the fighting here in a makeshift cemetery in the ground of an old football field where kids used to play.
A few former residents wander, shell-shocked, through once familiar alleyways. But one family never left. Mariam Adam is 75. As the RSF swept through town last spring, their neighbours fled in terror. But when militiamen came to their door, the Adams refused to leave.
We've seen everything that happened here. We saw the lights of weapons shoot across the sky. We heard all the sounds, and we're still here. A shell hit the house, shattering the glass and walls. That was the first shell that hit our home, injuring me here and here.
Mariam's brother was killed, but miraculously, the rest of the family survived. For a year, they lived on almost nothing, sheltering in their stone house as the bombs rained down.
When the area was under the control of the RSF, they cut off the water and electricity. Last fall, we had to drink rainwater because there was no other water.
Schools have been shut since the war began. All 5-year-old Abak wants is to see her friends and teachers. She doesn't know who's still alive.
I love studying. They were teaching me the letter A for apple, B for boy, and C for chicken. I have friends at school, but the teacher left, and the kindergarten closed its doors.
As we embrace, their emaciated bodies tell how these proud elders gave everything they had to the younger family members. There's more food and water here now, but nothing's guaranteed.
This has not exhausted me. I am happy because I am still standing. I am a fighter. We hope to God that Sudan returns to how it was.
Just a few streets away, battles rage on. The emergency room is packed with panicked, injured families. The Ibrahim's home was just hit by an RSF shell.
We went to the mosque, and on our way back, shells started falling on us like rain, on the streets and on the houses, and we were running everywhere.
Al-Khair's brother Tijani believes nothing is being done to protect civilians in this war.
Children, women, and the elderly unarmed. They have nothing to do with the SAF or RSF, nothing to do with politics. Every home has become a grave. Why? Why all this? For democracy? Overseas, they announce democracy and human rights. They speak beautifully while acting despicably. And here we are in Sudan, dying by the weapons they provide while they say no more war.
Even here, they're not safe. The hospital has been hit 5 times already in as many months. Targeting hospitals in a conflict is a war crime. All of Omdurman's hospitals have been hit multiple times by shelling and small arms fire throughout the course of the war. Most of them aren't functioning anymore. Here at Al Now Hospital, the only surgical hospital still working. Every time there's a strike, they patch up the damage and carry on. 4 days after the news hour left, Al Now was hit again. Omdurman's largest private hospital already lies in ruins. The Al Buluk Children's Hospital has only just managed to reopen after being shelled last month. Here, overstretched doctors work to save young lives under the constant threat of attack.
I can't even find words to describe this. Hospitals are some places where people come to find sanctuary. I myself have been a victim of a stray bullet 2 months ago. It was one worker.
Dr. Musaddal specializes in infant malnutrition, a brutal side effect of this war, which is devastating Sudan's children. Mugahed is just 10 months old. He has acute malnutrition.
A lot of new admissions, a lot of cases under the age of 6 months. There's some cases coming from RSF controlled areas, which come in a very bad shape. Severe cases of severe acute malnutrition.
Mugahed's little body can't cope. His lungs are failing. He weighs just half what he should at this age.
It's heartbreaking. Truly, it's heartbreaking.
The hospital sees more than 100 cases like this each month. Families like Mugahed's are trapped behind fluid front lines with little access to food and water. Undernourished mothers can't produce the breast milk their babies need. Risking the journey to get them here is the only chance to save them, but they don't always make it. 9-month-old Uklan, named for another bitter war of survival, has had so little to eat in her early life that her organs are failing.
We fled here. Most of us walked on foot. It was very tough. Some people couldn't walk and others couldn't find food. We left everything behind, even my children's birth certificates.
Zakia's husband was killed in a missile attack. If Ukran survives, Zakia must now raise her and her 3 other children alone, with no home and no breadwinner. The level of need across the country is staggering. With little government or international aid, Sudanese communities are rallying to provide. Each evening, these displaced women in Omdurman gather to bake sorghum bread, much cheaper than wheat. The next morning, eager lines down the block to collect rations of bread, lentils, rice and broad beans, all paid for by donations from locals and Sudan's diaspora. This will be the only meal many of these families eat today. If nothing is done, by fall, millions of people will be starving to death. Gaddaref's rolling green hills and idyllic pastoral scenes belie the growing threat. This region is Sudan's breadbasket, but the RSF has already captured the neighboring agricultural states. Home to Sudan's largest grain reserve, stockpiling thousands of tons of food, Gaddaref's farmers are terrified that they're next.
Yes, people are talking, saying that the RSF are coming. They even tell me not to plant, asking, why are you planting? The RSF will take all the crops, they won't leave anything, and people will starve and die.
RSF forces are closing in on Gaddaref in a pincer movement. An RSF victory here would be nothing short of catastrophic for the country's dwindling food supply. As hundreds of thousands of the elderly, the injured, the desperate mothers and their weary children search in vain for a safe place to wait out this war and enough food to survive it. International leaders meet, promising to find solutions. Few here believe that help is coming. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Layla Malana Allen in Gaddaref, Sudan.
In her 3rd report from the front lines in Sudan with
So, to help me unpack what's happening in Sudan and the situation, the different actors, perhaps why the conflict is happening, I have my fellow colleague, esteemed professors here at the Josef Korbel. First, I have Ambassador Grappo, who is our distinguished fellow, and Dr. Ahmed Abdrabou, who is a teaching assistant professor and an associate director of the Middle East Center.
And I'm not the dean. This is wrong. Okay? I'm happy Fritz is not here. Otherwise, we would have.
Thank you for that correction. Yes.
Okay.
So I'll start with Gary. The movie has painted a very dire situation, and this was produced in August of 2024. Obviously, the situation has deteriorated since then. And a few days ago, the UN launched an appeal for $6 billion in humanitarian assistance needed to help the situation in Sudan, but also the neighboring countries that have been impacted. In your view, what can the international community do to support the needs in Sudan?
Thank you very much, Abby, and it's a pleasure to join you and Ahmed at this session. It's interesting that the UN has called for a $7 billion fund for assistance to for the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. The earlier fund had received pledges about $2.7 billion. Less than 35% of that was filled. And that's due to both the inability of humanitarian aid to gain access into the country. There's a war, and therefore humanitarian workers are unable to enter the country. And in those cases that do, the food, medical shipments, and other humanitarian supplies are either kidnapped or stolen or halted and turned back. And so it's very, very difficult to get humanitarian aid into the country itself. Most of the humanitarian aid that has been distributed has reached the areas where Sudanese refugees have taken up temporary residence. The principal country is South Sudan, over 650,000 Sudanese refugees there. Bear in mind that South Sudan is going through its own crisis, both political and less security and economic. Chad is the second major recipient, almost 600,000 refugees on the border between Chad and Sudan. And then Egypt, by the way, is the third largest recipient country of over 3 million Sudanese refugees in various areas. I would like to be hopeful about the $7 billion. I'm sure that's de minimis. I'm sorry? $6 billion. But having failed to reach even half of the earlier pledges, I'm somewhat skeptical that they're going to be able to come anywhere close to what is needed, which is a tragedy given the appalling nature of this humanitarian crisis. In fact, one runs out of adjectives to describe this crisis. According to the UN Coordinator for Human Rights and also the Director for Refugees of the United Nations, this is the world's worst human rights crisis, the worst, which is saying something, considering we face humanitarian crises in Gaza, in Yemen, in Haiti, Myanmar, and other places around the world. And given the certain state, the present state of the war in Sudan, I don't see any diminishing of this crisis, tragically.
So in short, there might not be sufficient funding to address the humanitarian crisis right now.
There may not be.
All right. Thank you for painting that picture for us. Ahmed, did you want to add?
Yeah, just in my point of view, it's not just resources, it's also the access points. For humanitarian work, you need 3 different phases. Number 1, you want to make sure your humanitarian employees are safe. 2, you want to make sure that you approach the right people who really need humanitarian, medical, etc. support. And then 3, you want to make sure that the people themselves are safe, who receive these. So in my point of view, in addition to the resources problem, it's also the access points. We don't have right now even the most famous camp in Zamzam camp, which is in across the border from Chad. It's not even safe, and this is the main complaint right now. The humanitarian workers or employees are not able to to have safe access, which is another problem to be added to the resources.
Absolutely. And just on the points that Gary brought out about how this, the Sudanese conflict is the biggest one, but I also I'm wondering if it's the biggest one and facing the greatest probably humanitarian crisis that is out there, why hasn't there been sufficient media coverage? As Gary mentioned, we have seen wars in Syria, we have seen being covered appropriately and adequately on almost all US medias. The Ukraine, Gaza, almost every day there's something, but there's rarely anything that you find on the war in Sudan. Ahmed, could you help us understand what's going on?
There is a historical trend with media lack of coverage to not just Sudan, but African civil wars in general, compared to other areas. I remember, for example, during the civil war in Rwanda, we had a similar problem. Almost same time, we had a war in Yugoslavia, and before that there was a war in the Gulf area. And again, Rwanda never received enough media coverage, if we just put aside the humanitarian support and the international support. So in my point of view, there are two different factors here. One is, in my point of view, there is some sort of racial discrimination, even with media. Yesterday, I was watching Netflix documentary on a white lady who disappeared in the United States, Gabby Petito, and it's a very, of course, sad story, but there was also part of the documentary was about the media coverage to white women disappearing versus, let's say, brown, black, or indigenous women disappearing, and with the number. So I guess it's the same story. This is part of it. Second problem is media covers whenever there is political interest. And even though no one can deny that Sudan is significantly important for so many regional and superpowers, but still the political interest in other areas are much more, and this is why, in my point of view, media coverage is not sufficient to Sudan. There is a third and final factor, and I guess it's much more specific to the Arab Middle Eastern area, which is, I remember debating with a scholar. I'm not just talking about a random guy, a scholar about, his idea was that this call to cover Sudan is just some sort of a conspiracy to distract the attention from Gaza, which, again, I'm not underestimating the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's definitely bad. But I don't see that the media coverage of Sudan would just take people from, covering or focusing on what's going on in Gaza. So there are so many aspects related to why this media is not there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for helping understand that. Is there an aspect of, within the fighting itself, of ethnic or racial conflict at play like we saw in Darfur some years ago?
It's the very same thing. Mm-hmm. Since Darfur, nothing really changed. So yes, definitely. First of all, we have to understand that the two major conflicting sides are same race. So Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who's the head of the Sudanese armed forces, he's an Arab, and also Hamidati, who is leader of the Rapid Support Forces, is also an Arab. And the Rapid Support Forces is also mainly composed of Janjaweed, which is also an Arab nomad people. So it's mainly a power struggle. However, there have been so many racial and ethnic cleansing factor involved. And I guess as of now, we have this disaster since 2023, we have the problem for the non-Arab people in Darfur. And it's exactly a copy and paste from the same problems that existed many years ago when there was a war in Darfur. It's the very same thing. In my point of view, the racial aspect is sometimes used as a camouflage to mobilize people and to consolidate political legitimacies, but definitely it's there.
Please go ahead.
The war that Ahmed mentioned in Darfur over 20 years now actually attracted far more international attention to the point where there were claims of genocide, which is, of course, happening again, and crimes against humanity also happening again. And the president of Sudan at the time, Omar al-Bashir, was found guilty of crimes against humanity, and an arrest warrant was issued, but he was never arrested. He was overthrown in 2018 or 2019 by the two principal military figures now involved in the war. And so, and in that war, and in this war, we are witnessing the same kind of ethnic cleansing. Arabs going after native African people in those areas. Bear in mind, there are over 100 different ethnic tribal groupings, mostly in the west, in the south of the country. And today, one of the shocking and most shocking and disturbing things that have begun to emerge is something called trophy videos. The trophy videos are videos taken by combatants, the ones that I have seen and the ones that are typically publicized have been taken by the RSF. And these individuals actually film scenes of mass executions, murder, torture, serial rape, and other gross violations of human rights. They are filmed and then posted on various sites on the internet, which is obviously quite shocking and appalling. The one interesting note, however, is that the International Criminal Court has already launched an investigation and is collecting all of those, or at least those that they can acquire, and will probably use these as evidence in any charges that are brought by the International Criminal Court. But when you hear references, and they've captured these on these videos, of eradication, elimination, ethnic cleansing, actually said by those on the videos, it's pretty much living proof that this is a genocide that's taking place against these individual peoples.
And in addition to that, there's also a gendered aspect of the conflict. As you saw in the video, women are suffering the most. Apart from being killed, being displaced, there's also sexual violence, gender-based violence, and we're seeing a resurgence of the use of sex as a weapon of war. And so many women have been pregnant or have had to take their own lives before they can be raped. So the war has really been a double impact for women, to say the very least. And in a situation where there's no health care, as was also noted from the documentary, the war has really taken a toll on women in unprecedented ways. But Gary, I would want to move on to ask you to explain the international involvement of states, particularly such as the Gulf states, the US, and there seems to be a lot of actors in Sudan. Could you help us understand what are their roles? What are they doing, all these states, and are they even making the situation better?
There are a handful of countries trying to make the situation better that have tried to broker negotiations which have not succeeded to this point. But there are also several countries that are abetting this war that's now going on. I think mentioned in the video is the UAE support for the RSF. You'd wonder why they would bother to do that. It has significant investments in Sudan, most especially in gold. Just so you have an idea of why this is, I checked the current international market price of gold today. It's around $93,000 a kilo, and about 450 kilos of gold from Africa, mostly mined by artisanal miners, not by companies, is secreted illegally out of Africa every year, and 400 of that goes to the UAE. The UAE has become a launderer of gold. It enters the gold markets and souks of the UAE. All the transactions are cash, so virtually impossible to track and report. The United States and other countries have brought this before the UAE, who complains, well, they're cash transaction. How can we possibly deal with this? There was pressure applied in the Biden administration. I don't think it was enough, and I don't know what the current U.S. administration will do. So the UAE is supporting the RSF, by the way, giving them weapons or selling them weapons. We know that Russia is doing the same, although Russia is playing both sides because of its interest in the gold, as well as all other rare earth minerals. Egypt is supporting the Sudanese armed forces, as well as Turkey, Qatar on the political side, and a few other countries. In terms of those who are actually working, I would say, constructively, Saudi Arabia, which initially had supported the SAF, but is now working with the United States on the diplomatic side. Turkey, which has supported the SAF, is now putting itself up as a possible mediator in future talks. There have been about 5 or 6 diplomatic sessions to try and broker some kind of a ceasefire, to try and facilitate the movement of humanitarian goods into the country under some kind of protected status, or safe encampments where the humanitarian workers can go in order to reach and treat the Sudanese who are affected by the war. None of those talks have succeeded. Even secret talks have been attempted, and those have failed. And some of my students in diplomacy will know, in a civil war like this, neither side is going to show interest in negotiation until one side has a clear advantage over the other. And that has not been the case. That's number one. Number two, they have irreconcilable objectives completely. The Sudanese armed forces, led by Ahmed, are unwilling to even sit down with the RSF, who they see as a insurrectionist movement, and therefore not an equal to the SAF, which represents the government of Sudan. Ahmed and the RSF, on the other hand, assert that they must have a role in any future governance of Sudan, and Ahmed himself must play a key role in that future government. So you can see that there's really no overlap in the objectives of those two countries, which makes negotiation extraordinarily difficult. Turkey has put itself up now to host the next round of talks. Neither side has indicated an interest, although they're being pressured by various countries to join those talks. The United States supports that, as does Saudi Arabia. Switzerland, which had hosted one of the talks in Geneva that was referred to in the video. So we'll have to see, but the odds right now, because there's no side has clear momentum at the point. Although, as I think the Vice President of Sudan had mentioned, it seems that the SAF now has slight momentum, but not an advantage by any stretch. And then fighting throughout the western, southern, and central part of Sudan is still pretty intense, including in the capital, Khartoum.
We surely hope for the best, because Turkey was able to broker a peace deal between Ethiopia and Somalia last year, so they did a great job. Hopefully, in this ninth iteration of negotiations, we'll probably get it right. That's the hope. Ahmed, how can we reduce the high involvement of actors in Sudan?
Okay, yeah, no, there's no way. Practically speaking, there's no way. I guess the problem is over years, many countries have many stakes in Sudan, and there is no practical way where you can decrease the involvement of foreign actors. However, in my point of view, the only pragmatic answer to that question is how can we convince those who are involved and those who have leverage, those who have influence to, incentivize the struggling or the clashing sides to negotiate. I just want to take a step back and to what Gary mentioned about what does it mean to have a better Sudan or to make the situation better. I usually take off from my training, which is military civil security relations. And I guess the problem in Sudan, this is a country, if you study military coup d'etats in the world, and I guess, I'm not 100% sure, but the statistically speaking, the biggest number is in Sudan. I'm not sure if I can really. So, for example, Hamidati is accused now of staging a coup against Burhan. Burhan himself came with a coup back in 2019, and Bashir, who was ousted from power in 2019, he himself came with another coup back in 1989. So part of the problem here is a stable Sudan is, I guess, something that we all want. However, it's not enough. Without having a civilian control, not to mention democracy or the democratic regime, but at least a civilian control of Sudan, there is no way you can have a stable Sudan. You can have some ceasefires, you can have some humanitarian corridors, some breaks from the war, but there's no way you can really have a long-standing peace in Sudan and stability in Sudan without civilian control. And here is a problem. Most of regional powers are not really interested in having civilian control in Sudan. Why is that? Because most of these powers that we're talking about, whether it's United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya, these regimes are mainly taken either by military juntas or at least by non-democratically elected leaders. So they don't support any civilian control in Sudan, even though I can understand they support stability, but with military control. And the military control in Sudan has just made it clear over history that it was never able to provide Sudanese with a long-standing stability.
That's a dimming future for civilian rule in Sudan, would you say?
In 2019, you can always tell that Sudanese people were somehow close. They made it clear that they are looking for a democratic, civilian-controlled Sudan. However, as I said, it's not easy, and to be honest, I don't see it coming in the foreseeable future, given how much of leverage Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and other regional powers have in the region. In Sudan itself.
Okay. Yes, that is very unfortunate because the run-up to the overthrow of al-Bashir was heavily driven by civilians, and particularly women played a big role. Gary, how can the U.S., leverage the situation in Sudan to achieve some semblance of peace and perhaps even maybe a civilian rule?
The U.S. has pretty limited contacts with the Sudanese armed forces, and to my knowledge, almost none. Maybe on the intelligence side, there may be some that I'm not aware of. So very limited on the side of the Sudanese armed forces. There was a secret meeting that was to have taken place that was referred to in the video in Port Sudan between U.S. representatives and the SAF. What was not mentioned in the video was that the U.S. delegation was detained. And that's why they didn't travel elsewhere in Sudan. I'll just step aside and say that American diplomats are a big target almost anywhere they go. And I know that from personal experience. And after the experience in 2012 when Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed by militia groups in Libya for doing what ambassadors do, traveling to another area of the country to meet with a political faction, the U.S. government was very, very reluctant to send its officials, its diplomats, into war zones. That was not always the case. As a young diplomat myself, I traveled to war zones sometimes by myself. And so, but now I think they've been chastened, certainly by the experience that my friend and colleague experienced, Chris Stevens, in Libya, and other experiences. We just refrain from sending diplomats in serious harm's way because we can't provide the protection that we typically do for them. I don't agree with that policy. I never really have liked it. Diplomats always take risks, and this sometimes is a time, there are times when they are sometimes necessary. They should be calculated risks, but nevertheless, in this particular case, I think after the unfortunate experience in Port Sudan, we're not sending anyone into Sudan for a while. We were one of the last embassies, by the way, to shut down in Khartoum. So a good friend and colleague of mine was the ambassador there at the time. So in terms of what we can do going forward, the United States is not without leverage on two key players, Egypt and the UAE. I was disappointed the Biden administration did not apply more pressure on particularly the UAE. Now, maybe they did, and it was kept quiet. The UAE is a close friend and partner of the United States in the Middle East. We work together on many, many issues throughout the Middle East, and typically you don't embarrass a friend and partner by going public when you disagree with them. So I have no doubt that there were some pretty testy private conversations. To the extent they may have achieved anything, I haven't seen it. And similarly in the case of Egypt. So I'm not going to predict what this administration is going to do on Sudan. If I was forced to pick one, I don't think they're going to show a lot of interest. And to get it back to your previous point, the United States, unfortunately and short-sightedly, has never shown a great deal of attention to Africa. President Biden, despite pledges of wanting to go there, did not go, although many cabinet-level officers did go during his administration. But the American people, who generally don't show a whole lot of interest in foreign policy unless America is at war, have shown the least interest in the continent of Africa, which is tragic considering as we move forward where growth and opportunity is going to be happening in the world. And so I'm not sure Mr. Trump is looking at Africa all that seriously. The only way you may be able to entice him is to pull the Zelensky ploy that is dangling rare earth minerals, and he may be attracted to that. He's looking for deals. And Ukraine, or well, Ukraine too, but Sudan is very, very rich, one of the richest countries in Africa when it comes to rare earth minerals.
Thank you, Gary. So would you say that there's a diplomatic solution to the war in Sudan? And if there is, what does it look like?
No, there is no diplomatic solution right now. Not when the two sides are as far apart as these two, and irreconcilable. And I'm not overstating that. It's just the two sides have nothing in common, and therefore it would be difficult in diplomacy to find a common ground because there really is none. Except yes, they certainly say they want to see an end to the conflict, but under what condition? Well, the condition is our side wins, and neither side has demonstrated an ability of gaining a true advantage. I would probably say that the SAF has more international support, at least politically, but it's not working sufficiently in their favor. And as long as the RSF is getting the amount of weapons and the type of weapons that they need, which they are, and can recruit fighters as others are lost during combat. My suspicion is they'll continue to fight as long as they can. I mean, the war is pretty dynamic, but if you look at now what's happening in Darfur and in South Kordofan, is the map up there? Yeah, it's the southernmost province there in Sudan. The fighting is very, very intense. Wholesale villages are being burned to the ground. Farms are being destroyed. This is one of the most agriculturally rich areas in Sudan. There's some equal areas in Darfur. And so this has repercussions for the future of this country. But there are no signs right now that either of the sides is interested in meeting at the negotiating table.
So no diplomatic solution for the moment until guns stop flowing, until the actors are also exhausted in fighting. What is the implication for Egypt, Ahmed?
Before, I'll come to Egypt in a second, but
Okay.
I agree there is no immediate hope. However, I guess there is always a horizon for diplomatic solutions. The problem, as I said before, is to what extent that can really build a nation state that is stable and somehow governed by civilians, where there are some constitutional rules respected. One idea I always have from the history of conflicts in Muslim majority areas or in some Arab and Middle Eastern areas is whenever you have the Ramadan, which is holy months for Muslims, where Muslims fast, it's sometimes you can use the religiosity of the both sides to at least convince them for a ceasefire. So my hope would be Ramadan is coming soon in I guess less than 2 weeks. So that can be an opportunity not for a solution, but for some sort of a ceasefire. So back to the humanitarian assistance, where hopefully the United Nations and other humanitarian actors can get secure access points to the region.
I like that idea. Thank you
Yeah,
for giving us a
so.
little bit of hope.
But back to Egypt, in order to discuss the Egyptian policy towards Sudan, I guess, there is this story of Egypt-Africa relations. And in Egypt, unfortunately, over the last 30, 40 years, at least since the end of the 1970s, Sudan and other African nations are no longer the priority of Egyptian diplomacy. And that was true till at least 2013, 2014. Now with the current administration, I guess there is a reconsideration to how to prioritize Sudan and other African nations in the Egyptian diplomacy. I remember when I graduated from Cairo University, most of my friends and colleagues who joined the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was kind of punishment for those who don't have good connections to be sent to Africa. It's true. Why? Because, maybe lack of stability, but also the stipend is the worst. True. And so it became in the Egyptian diplomacy, at least younger generations, you're punished if you're sent to Sudan or Rwanda or even South Africa, which is a little bit, more stable, but still it was some sort of a punishment. However, over the last decade or so, given the Egyptian problem with Ethiopia, when it comes to the Renaissance Dam, which is built by the Ethiopians, the Egyptians are complaining from how that can really impact the flow of water from the River Nile. Now Egypt has started to pay real attention to Sudan. Again, not to support the long-standing peace, stability, but at least to support Burhan, because in the Egyptian mind, Burhan is much more closer to them, given his previous affiliations, but also because Burhan forces are securing at least in control of the coastal lines areas in the Red Sea, which is very important for the Egyptians because of the Suez Canal, but also because of trade Egypt has with Sudan, given also the deteriorating economic situation in Egypt. And as I said, the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia is a key magic word for the Egyptians caring about Sudan trying to bring stability, but again, stability by the Egyptian conditions, which is favoring Burhan at the expense of our rapid support forces.
Did you want to add?
I was going to say one other factor that's very rarely reported, to the extent anything is reported about Sudan these days, and that is Burhan and his government has a number of Islamist factions who were previously associated with Omar al-Bashir, the former dictator who was overthrown in 2018-19. And he needs these factions to remain within his government, and he's concerned that if he were to agree to negotiations and therefore likely compromises, that he would lose his position and be overthrown. That's quite possible. And so it's another incentive for him to hold the line until the point where the SAF has a clear advantage in this conflict, which, as I've said repeatedly, they're far from reaching at this point. There are other complicating factors. Most of the countries that surround Sudan are facing crises of their own. Almost every single one of them. Less so Egypt, although Egypt is dealing with some pretty severe economic conditions right now, brought on by the reduced traffic through the Red Sea. They receive a fairly significant number of their hard currency earnings from canal traffic, Suez Canal traffic, which has been reduced by half because of the problems in the Red Sea now with the Houthis in Yemen attacking commercial shipping traffic. So there are these other factors that play into this conflict that show that it's more than just a civil war. It certainly and most definitely is, but you have the international participation and you have the repercussions or potential repercussions on the surrounding countries. And just to add one more element to this, I've talked about the numbers of refugees. We have seen this movie before. Wars producing refugees, and the refugees need to find a place of safety and of economic opportunity. In the case of Africa and the Middle East, that's Europe. And Europeans are paying attention to this conflict. I don't see them as particularly active, but just because I don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. We're less likely to see it here in the United States, but I wouldn't dismiss it. Afghan refugees, Syrian refugees, and refugees from Africa have been detained crossing the border with Mexico. So the refugee crisis is likely to worsen as the war continues.
Absolutely. Just on that, the implication for the region is also great in the sense that, for instance, countries like South Sudan cannot take on any more refugees because the country itself is having economic problems. And because of the war, South Sudan has had a reduction or almost complete loss of its revenue following the disruption or the destruction of its oil pipeline in the upper Nile state. So South Sudan depends on oil. A revenue for its budget, 80% of its budget relies on oil from exports through Sudan, through Port Sudan. And so since the oil pipeline was destroyed last year, the country has not been able to export oil, which means its economy is not doing well, which means that could have political implication in an already very, very fragile country. And so if the conflict goes on and there's no revenue, we could also see a resurgence of fighting in Sudan. And also, we are seeing the high numbers of refugees in Chad, which is also unsustainable. And then there's also fighting on the borders that is overlapping with countries like Ethiopia, which already has some of its own insurgencies, for instance, in the Amara region. So generally speaking, the situation, the war in Sudan is impacting the Horn of Africa and East Africa region in proportions that we are yet to see if it continues. But we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, if I may just add one point. since I know many students are also here today, part of the Sudanese problem is not just for the refugees, but for the internally displaced people, which are kind of technically refugees as well, because they are forced out of their homes. We've around 6 to 7 million estimation, like 6 to 7 million inside Sudan, but forced out of their homes. So this is one problem. Back to your point, I guess one of the big questions I have, and to be honest, I have no answer. Where is the African Union? The African Union, if you go and read the Charter of the African Union, you know, part of that is mainly about situations like that, how to prevent civil war, how to support and consolidate democracy, civilian control. If you read the Charter of the African Union, it's all about that. And in the past, there have been some relatively successful missions. Unfortunately, over the last 8, 9, 10 years, the African Union is no longer present. Maybe some talks here and there, but no real effectiveness on the ground. And I'm not sure if Ambassador Grappo has an answer for where is the African Union.
Early on in the conflict, I think they were involved, but they were seen by particularly the RSF as not being objective enough. They were seen to be too close to the SAF and the then Sudanese government, and they've sort of lost any traction that they've had now with both sides. IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is a grouping of East African and Horn of Africa countries, has stepped in, and in one case offered to host a secret meeting between the two leaders. And I think it was supposed to take place in Ethiopia, but at the last moment, Ahmed withdrew. So without question, the African Union needs to be involved. And I would say in a better world, I won't say perfect, because it probably, for the time being, does not show much possibilities. But in a better world, you'd see the African Union, the United Nations, and some of the other principal states like Saudi Arabia and the United States, the UAE and Egypt, coming together to put pressure on the two sides. But as yet, we have yet to see that level of collaboration among the various outside states and international organizations.
Yeah, I think it comes back to your point earlier, whereby the different stakeholders, the states that are involved in Sudan, have had such vested interest. They have, investments. They are supporting different militaries, and so those states, I think, seem to have driven the agenda for mediation and almost captured the mediation that was initially started by the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. But this is not to defend the African Union. I think you are absolutely right. This is a situation that the African Peace and Security Architecture was created for. This is the situation where the early warning mechanism was created for. The panel of the wise, we haven't seen anything like that come through. So yes, I think this is the right question to be asking. What else is being done by the African Union, despite the active involvement of the US and Saudi Arabia, and now Turkey in the mediation? If you allow me, I'd like to open it up to our students. We have a lot of students today, and also just people that might have questions for the panelists. All right, I see a hand in the back. Are we going to use the same mic? You may please introduce yourself. Just give your name.
Hi, my name is Katie Lamberton, and I'm taking an international politics class, and our class right now is really focused on the United Nations Security Council, and so I was wondering what their role is currently in this conflict and what's being done, who's opposing any intervention, and what's happening.
Yes, in Russia. To really put it in very simple terms, the multiple times the members of the Security Council have tried to bring Sudan to the attention of the Security Council with some kind of proposed resolution. It's been vetoed by Russia. Not surprising. And so, and I don't see that changing in the near future. Now, there are already existing Security Council resolutions that apply to Sudan. Many countries are honoring those. Obviously, the parties to the conflict are not, and Russia is not, and some of the other countries. There is a ban on, there's supposed to be a ban on sending offensive weapons to Sudan. Well, we know many countries are not respecting that. So even if we could get a resolution through, I'm not sure that it would be honored. I mean, even the one resolution that did manage to get through, dealing with, did manage to be tabled and debated before the Security Council, dealing strictly with humanitarian, was vetoed by Russia. So I don't see a role in the near term for the UN Security Council, sadly, because that's why it exists, for conflicts just like this one.
If I may, I would agree with Ambassador Grappo. However, I'm not by any means defending Putin. However, I don't only blame Russia. Definitely Russia is one of the problems when it comes to Sudan. In 2022, in my international politics class, the final exam had this video of, I give this exam to my students, where there was an emergency meeting in the Security Council called after Russia invaded Ukraine. Who was the head of the meeting? It was Russia. And it was kind of really, it's a real black jokes. Like you have the country that is, in my point of view, I'm not only blaming Russia, because unfortunately we have to understand the Security Council is dysfunctional. And why it's dysfunctional, not just because of Russia, because of the veto power. The current equation, the current whatever formula of the veto power does reflect the balance of power back in 1945. Ever since, so many changes. Again, I agree that unfortunately I don't see any futuristic or future rule to the Security Council, but in my point of view, it's much more deeper than Russia. It's more of how the system is, just doesn't work.
But the UN is still working to try and get humanitarian aid and move people around. They are the main actor working to secure people in Sudan. So it's just on the political track and on the mediation aspect that the UN has been lacking. Any more questions? All right. Shall we go here? We can take 3 at a go.
Thank you. My name's Brian Murray. I'm actually working on another degree in information and cybersecurity. This past week, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov was in Sudan, at Port Sudan, negotiating a deal to open up a facility there. And I was wondering what you thought about that, or they've tried this before, but with them being moved out of Libya, they're moving to Libya from when they were moved out of their base that was in the Mediterranean at that particular time. They were moved, I believe it was to Benghazi, where they already have a base. By them having another base over there, how do you think that's going to impact the conflicts that's going in Africa right now?
Well, because I don't see Russia playing a constructive
Gary,
role.
could we take 2 more?
Oh, I'm
2
sorry.
more.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, 2 more questions.
I was wondering if you know the current status of Turkey's mediation effort. I felt that their effort is refreshing and that they're negotiating with the UAE instead of doing what the U.S. and Saudi effort is doing, which is focusing on the 2 major warring parties, which they're just in a contest for power. There's not really much there's not really much point of negotiating between them. They're just both trying to be the main military power. But whereas negotiating with the UAE seems to be relevant and helpful. So I was encouraged to hear about their initiative, but I haven't heard anything since it started, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So can I pass it down to the student?
Sure. My name is Frankie, and my question is that since the argument has been made that right now there is no diplomatic end to this conflict, whether any attempts or initiatives from any of the actors present have been put forth to better protect civilians as the conflict goes on, and which strategies you all think might be most effective.
All right, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Russia trying to cement a presence at Port Sudan. Russia has supported both sides. Certainly the RSF with weapons, the Wagner Group for a time being, when they were known as Wagner, now I think they're called the Africa Corps. Basically, they're mercenaries that Russia sends to conflict zones, particularly in Africa these days. I'm not sure it's going to be very constructive, but to the extent that perhaps it will now see it has a genuine interest in stability in Sudan, it might possibly potentially produce some results, but I'm suspicious. On the Turkey, nothing has happened yet, but two countries, critical countries, the UAE and Egypt, have supported Turkey's invitation to host a dialogue or a negotiating session. I don't believe either the United States or Saudi Arabia has taken a position of yet. This was a fairly recent development, latter part of the year, by which time, the Biden administration was on the way out, and therefore did not indicate one way or the other whether it supported the Turkish initiative. It has potential, principally because it's got the UAE and Egypt on board. But I haven't heard of anything being scheduled. I would particularly like to see, from my point of view, the United States and Saudi Arabia support that effort as well, in which case there may be some possibility. But I haven't seen developments as of yet.
For the diplomacy question, I guess I myself believe that there is hopefully some efforts that can succeed. My argument is a little bit different. My argument is this is unfortunately not going to be a long-standing, stable Sudan. However, diplomacy can succeed in one or two conditions. One is that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates agree on the terms of this peace, which unfortunately not the case so far, even though you can say that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, when it comes to other Middle Eastern affairs, they are very close. But when it comes to Sudan, they have conflicting interests. This is one condition. If Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, or the second condition, if President Trump or Trump administration is giving real attention, I guess they can, given the history of the U.S. involvement, they can directly or indirectly convince the three parties I mentioned, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, to stage some sort of negotiations or, again, for either a ceasefire or for a long-term stability.
Frankie, I hope your question was answered. Yeah. The next question?
Hi, my name is Ella, and I was wondering if you could further elaborate on the weapons deal between Sudan and Iran and what that can mean for future American influence.
My understanding is that it was for drones, and the Iranians have shown themselves to be very adept at designing and building some pretty sophisticated drone technology. And they initially were providing drones to Russia in its war against Ukraine, and now they're sharing the technology, and Russia is effectively copying Iranian drone technology. So it was drones that were provided to the SAF, and it may account for the recent change in momentum in the conflict there. There have been some SAF victories in Darfur and in South Kordofan, still very preliminary, too preliminary to suggest that somehow they are the winning side. But the drones undoubtedly may have played a critical role in this. In terms of the implications, I don't know what Iran's interest might be in Sudan. Iran is desperate to find friends and allies wherever they can find them. They don't have many. But it is interesting because you have countries like Egypt and the UAE and Saudi Arabia also with strong interests in the outcome of this conflict. And so I'm sure that will play into the calculus that both the Iranians and these other Middle Eastern countries are having to figure out as they move forward.
In answering the question of why Iran has been involved, of course, I have no secret information or reliable information, but I guess in my point of view, because of the Emirati involvement, because Iran, and as you can see, this is why, unfortunately, it's very, very harsh to get into a long-standing peace, because like all different players have some other games they play, and unfortunately that comes at the expense of Sudan. So United Arab Emirates have historical issues with Iran, and in my point of view, maybe that can explain the Iranian involvement. Another problem is you have some of the actors are not crystal clear in terms of with whom they side. Like you have, for example, Iran also, there are some proofs that Iran started to open a channel of dialogue with Sudanese armed forces. With Rapid Support Forces. And so you really don't know for sure what kind of game is played. And in my point of view, because many countries are just trying to get as much benefits from this conflict, and unfortunately, this is a price of having a failed state. It's many regional, sometimes super actors just take advantage of you without really being really intentionally trying to support peace. And even if they support peace, they are conditioning this peace in their own terms and their own interests.
We had a couple more over here.
There's also the issue of Sudan sending foot soldiers to Yemen. That also has brought in Iran into the conflict, but also we can see the opening up of the Sahel region, the possibility of insurgents coming from Chad and the Central African Republic passing through Sudan, because now the country is so fragile and volatile, and so there's such high movement, unrestricted movement across the borders. So there's also fears that there would be some insurgents or armed groups that will be sent to the war in Yemen, right? So we continue. Yes, I think she was first.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'm Sophia. I was wondering, what did the U.S.'s response to al-Bashir's reign look like? Was there anything done about it?
No, we were delighted. I mean, he was a convicted war criminal. So yeah, we were delighted, and I think as Ahmed mentioned, there was a period there when hopes were very high. I mean, this was going to be Arab Spring 2.0. Recall that there was something similar going on in Algeria at the time, and so people's hopes were up that we might finally see the emergence of something resembling democracy. Civil society movement became very strong, and there were clear signs that the Sudanese people really wanted this to happen. So yes, we were applauding. The United States dropped almost all of its sanctions against Sudan once Bashir was overthrown. So yes, we were delighted to see that. We were obviously pretty chagrined when the head of the transitional government was overthrown by Burhan and Ahmed, which at that time were working together. The RSF and the SAF, for a very, very brief period of time, were working together to remove the civilian government. And now we are where we are.
My name is Sama, and my question was also about weaponry. So I know you mentioned that the UAE was selling weapons to the RSF, and Russia is selling weapons to both sides, or providing weaponry. Could you elaborate on who's playing the biggest roles in the weapons and what the U.S.'s role is in that?
We are honoring the weapons ban on Sudan, as are most countries around the world. The film made reference to U.S.-made weapons making their way from the UAE, which, as we indicated before, is supporting the RSF. That may be possible. That would be a violation of U.S. law, and that would be a point of leverage for the United States in its discussions with the UAE. We could impose sanctions. I doubt that we would do it on the UAE, but we could certainly do it on any UAE person, entity, or business involved in the transference of weapons to the RSF. But they don't even need to be American. We can impose sanctions because of the overall ban against weapons going to Sudan right now. But the United States does not send weapons to Sudan that I am aware. If they're done covertly for reasons I wouldn't understand at the moment.
And just I can add just a very little point here, which is even before this war started, when Burhan and Hamidati were fighting together, were still together. To my knowledge, there has never been 100% embargo on arms deals and arms sales to Sudan. This is one of the countries since Darfur War that has been always receiving covertly or directly or indirectly weapons from different parties. I'm not sure, to be honest, which part is selling more because I guess we don't have reliable information. But for sure, this is another problem. It didn't start with this war. It has been a long-standing kind of practice of selling arms to Sudanese different parties, including the two parties who are fighting against each other. When they were fighting together, they were also receiving support from different. And this is why it's possible for Russia to sell arms for both sides, because they already established channel of communications with them when they were fighting together. So these are also part of the sad picture of the current situation in Sudan.
Hi, my name's Chuck, and on that same note, do we know how the weapons are getting to the RSF, like what route they're taking?
They're smuggled across the border in some cases, but in other cases, and the U.S. is, and other countries perhaps, have collected intelligence indicating that aircraft are flying into parts of Sudan and dropping off weapons. I'm sorry?
Parts that are under RSF control.
Potentially, but that may be happening with the SAF too. I don't know, but certainly in those areas controlled by the RSF, most definitely. There are aircraft flying in and delivering weapons. And they've even been able to identify the source of them, which was the UAE. But these are very porous borders. We're talking about some of the most remote areas in Africa, so it's not hard to get weapons into the combatants. Moreover, the international arms market has been around for a very, very long time. Anybody on this planet who wants access to arms can get them, and pretty much get the type of weapon, the most sophisticated, manufactured, whether it's in the United States, in China, in Russia, or elsewhere. For anyone who has the cash, there are weapons to be sold to them, and they're not hard to do.
This is part of the problem as well. You know, selling arms in Africa is not ideological, nor political. So, which means that no country is really supporting or supplying arms to one side because they want the side to really win the war or be the victorious side. It's much more of commercial, black market, etc. Another route I'm aware of is from Khalifa Haftar, who's a general of the eastern side of Libya, through Chad. This is for the light arms. again, I'm not sure the source. However, I can guess it's Russia, but I'm not 100% sure.
That's very true, Ahmed. Small weapons and light ammunition in Africa is a huge problem, especially for the Horn of Africa. Somalia had an Abdrabou, South Sudan as well, now Sudan. So there's a lot of movement, especially with small weapons and light ammunition from Somalia all the way to Yemen because of the porous borders, but also these countries are fragile. The countries are also at war, and when you're at war, usually controlling of weapons is a big challenge, and it's one of the biggest issues. I know that the African Union and the UN have been working in that region to try and disarm, especially the young people who are, the so-called food soldiers. And it's not difficult on the continent to obtain an AK-47. I mean, there are statistics in some countries whereby an average male of 18 to 35 owns an AK-47. So finding weapons is not a problem, especially light weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are no more questions, I would like to end this session because we are just a little bit past time. Allow me to thank our speakers. Yeah. I also want to thank our logistics team, Mandy, who is our program manager, and assistant Nicole for helping us put this whole thing together. If they were not here, we would not have the very delicious food that we had. We would not be able to see the video. So truly, truly thank you, Mandy and Nicole, for your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
of
you.
course. Thank you all for coming, and look out for other events for the Africa Center. Of course, we have our Sustainable Development Conference coming up in April, and we'll let you know of other programs. Thank you so much, and have a good night.